Somewhere in your town, there is a building you have driven past 1,000 times without ever really looking at it. A quiet parking lot, soft light behind the windows, a name on the sign that has probably been there longer than you have been alive. It does not run billboards or chase trends. And in a year, when half the storefronts on that same street are fighting just to keep the lights on, this one will do almost exactly the same numbers it did the year before. The funeral home might be one of the most stable businesses in America, and almost nobody thinks of it as a business at all. So let's treat it like one, because once you look at it the way an investor would, two quiet mysteries appear. The first is a question of ownership. That family name on the local sign might not be a family anymore, and figuring out who actually owns it leads somewhere strange. The second is a question of profit. This is a business with a customer base so reliable it should be untouchable, and yet the thing that makes it stable is not the thing that makes it money. Get both answers, and you understand almost everything about how death became an industry. Start with the foundation, the thing every other business on earth would kill to have. Roughly 3 million Americans die every year. That number does not care about interest rates, a recession, a market crash, or a bad quarter. There is an old line, usually credited to Benjamin Franklin, that nothing is certain in this world except death and taxes. And a funeral home is a business built directly on the first one. When people lose their jobs, they cancel the gym, delay the new car, stop eating out. But they do not stop dying. And when someone dies, the family still walks through that front door. Economists have a clinical phrase for demand that ignores the economy. They call it inelastic, and very few industries ever get to operate on a demand curve this flat. That is why you will hear this business described, over and over, as recession-proof. And it is close to true, but not quite, and the gap between those two words is where this whole story eventually turns. Because the number of deaths is relatively stable, but it is not fixed. It drifts with flu seasons, with pandemics, with the slow rise of human life expectancy. And more importantly, what families are willing to spend and how they choose to spend it is anything but stable. So keep that in the back of your mind. A floor under demand that moves far less than almost any consumer industry on earth is a genuine advantage. It is just not the same thing as a guarantee. Now look at the shape of the market, because it is stranger than you would expect. There are more than 15,000 funeral homes in the United States. And roughly 3/4 of them are still family-owned or privately held. This is not an industry of glass towers and national chains, at least not on the surface. It is thousands of small local operators, and the average single funeral home brings in somewhere around $1 million a year. Fragmented, local, and built entirely on trust. That trust is the real product. Because the one thing a grieving family will almost never do is behave like a normal shopper. Think about the conditions of the purchase. You are grieving. You are on a clock because arrangements have to be made within days. You have family watching and expectations to meet. And you are almost certainly unfamiliar with the entire process, because most people arrange a funeral only once or twice in their lives. Grief, time pressure, family expectations, and total unfamiliarity make this one of the hardest purchases in the entire economy to approach with a cool head. You do not pull up 3 funeral homes and compare quotes the week your mother dies. You go to the name you know, and you tend to accept most of what is recommended. That single reality, that this is the worst possible environment for careful price comparison, quietly shapes everything about how the money works. So let's follow the money. When a family sits down to arrange a funeral, the very first charge is one they legally cannot refuse. It is called the basic services fee, and it covers the funeral director's time, the coordination, the paperwork, the permits. By industry surveys, it usually runs somewhere north of $2,000, and it is non-declinable by design. You are paying it before you have chosen a single thing. After that, the menu opens up. Embalming, the viewing, the use of the facilities, the hearse. Each one itemized, each one added on in the emotional gravity of the moment. And then you reach the showroom, because for a traditional burial, the single largest line on the bill is almost always the casket. The average casket a family selects runs in the ballpark of $2,500, and here is the quiet truth of the trade. funeral homes have historically earned some of their fattest margins, not on services, but on merchandise. Consumer advocates have pointed out for decades that in many showrooms, the higher-priced caskets get the best placement and the best light, while the budget options sit in the corners. Regulators clearly had that dynamic in mind. Back in the 1980s, U.S. authorities introduced the funeral rule, which forces every funeral home to hand you an itemized price list, to quote prices over the phone, and specifically to show you casket prices before you walk into the showroom, partly so the cheaper options are not quietly overlooked. The rule also lets you buy a casket somewhere else and bring it in without penalty. In theory, that cracks the whole thing open. In practice, very few grieving families print out a spreadsheet and order a discount casket online. The rule exists. Human nature usually wins, and a median American funeral with a viewing and a burial lands around $8,300. But before we go further, there is one more revenue stream, and it is the one almost nobody outside the industry ever notices. It quietly turns a business of one-time purchases into something far more valuable. It is called the pre-need contract. The pitch is simple and, honestly, reasonable. Plan your own funeral now, pay for it now, at today's prices, so your family does not have to make those decisions in the fog of grief. For the customer, it is peace of mind. For the funeral home, it creates something almost no local service business ever gets. A long book of customers who have already decided, in writing, exactly where their funeral will one day be handled. Now, this is where it is easy to get the economics wrong, so let's be precise. That prepaid money does not just sit in a drawer at the funeral home for the next 30 years. By law in most states, it has to flow into a regulated trust or into a life insurance policy, and the funeral home only records it as revenue as the services are actually delivered, sometimes decades later. So it is not a pile of free cash. What it is a guaranteed future order book. To see the scale of it, look at the largest player in the industry, which has reported a backlog of pre-sold, not yet delivered funerals worth more than $15 billion. That is $15 billion of future funerals already contracted. Most industries would give anything for visibility like that. Which brings us to the first mystery, the one about ownership. That family name on the sign, the one that has been there for generations. It might not be a family anymore. Underneath all those thousands of independent little homes, a quiet consolidation has been running for decades. One company, Service Corporation International, is by far the largest death care operator in North America, with roughly 1,500 funeral locations, and, by most estimates, somewhere around 15% of the market. And here is the clever part. When a company like this buys a beloved local funeral home, it very often keeps the original name on the door. It operates under a whole portfolio of brands. But the neighborhood home the Johnson family has trusted for 80 years still says Johnson on the sign. The trust stays local. The ownership does not, because in this business, the local name is the moat, and you do not tear down a moat you just paid for. The great majority of the industry is still independent, which fits what we said earlier, that roughly 3/4 remain family or privately owned. So this is a slow roll-up, not a hostile takeover. The consolidators simply buy the best located, most trusted homes, one at a time, and let the sign do the work. An empire, assembled quietly, out of the last businesses anyone would ever call glamorous. And yet, for all that stability, the ground is genuinely shifting, and this is the second mystery. Why is a business with such reliable demand still under real pressure? The answer is one trend the industry cannot buy its way out of, and it has been building for years. Cremation. For most of American history, burial was the default. Then, right around 2015, cremation quietly overtook it for the first time. Today, well over 60% of Americans choose cremation, and the projections have that number heading toward 80% by the middle of the century. And cremation is a fundamentally cheaper transaction. A direct cremation can cost a fraction of a full burial. No casket, no burial vault, often no large viewing, which means the high-margin merchandise, the very heart of how these homes made their money, simply is not on the invoice anymore. Sit with what that does to the math. The number of deaths stays relatively stable, so the floor holds. But the revenue per death is quietly eroding year after year as families choose the simpler, cheaper path. The volume holds, while the dollars per customer shrink. That is the real pressure on this industry, and it is exactly why death-proof demand does not automatically add up to recession-proof profit. So how does the empire fight back? The same way clever businesses always do when their core product gets cheaper. They add new things to sell. Premium cremation packages, memorial jewelry that holds a pinch of ashes, personalized celebration of life services. And they lean harder into the parts of the business cremation cannot touch: the cemetery land, the perpetual care endowments, the higher margin real estate of the dead. They push pre-need contracts even harder, locking in today's prices before tomorrow's shrink. Which leaves us with the real lesson, the one that reaches well beyond funerals. The funeral home is a near-perfect case study in a specific kind of business. Not one built on demand you can grow, but on demand you can barely lose, with pricing power that comes from the one moment no human being stops to negotiate. That is a genuinely enviable position, and it is why the quiet building on your street will almost certainly outlast the flashier shops around it. But it is also a warning. A reliable customer base does not guarantee a reliable profit. When the product itself shifts underneath you, cheaper, simpler, faster, even the steadiest demand in the world can quietly stop paying what it used to. If you found yourself seeing that quiet building a little differently just now, that is the whole point of this channel. We take the ordinary things you walk past every day and show you the strange economics running underneath them. Subscribe, and next time, we will pull apart another business you have never once thought of as a business. Because the most interesting empires are almost always the ones hiding in plain sight.